back in the day of my rock and roll years, drugs are part of the deal. But it's interesting as you look back over your life, how you can see it more as a complex of interwoven threads and realize how some experiences informed where you are today. And that's certainly my experience with hallucinogenics, or certainly with LSD, otherwise known as acid. So today on the podcast, I'm going to talk to you a bit about my experiences back in those wild times. But more importantly, share with you what are some of the lessons I've learned that have stayed with me and been part of having me become who I am today, and inform in many ways some of the key ideas that I share. And the idea of that, of course, is to help you have that perspective alive in you without having to take the drugs. How cool is that? Hit it, Kim.
Welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast. You're in the right place if you're a growth-seeking being who acknowledges the challenges and delights of your humanity on the path to an ever more conscious life. If you want to feel inspired to love and accept yourself, to feel free to be and express you in all your brilliance, if you want to truly value yourself and others and feel energized and alive both at home and in the world, then sit back and take a breath as you explore and grow the brilliance of your beautiful human self with your host, the father of non-personal awareness and creator of the MPA process, Joel Young.
Hello, and welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. This is episode number 48, and you can find the show notes if you go to www.beabrillianthuman.com/48. In fact, you can find any of the episodes at www.beabrillianthuman.com. If you're new here, welcome. It's so good to have you on board. If you're back, you know I absolutely love the fact that you return and choose to spend this time with me. If you haven't already, make sure you download the MPA process, which you can get for free. You can find that again via the website, or you can go to www.mpa, that's November Papa Alpha, /me/MPA sheet, or to the general website, which is joelyoungnpa.com. And by the way, if you are new here and you're going, what the heck is MPA? MPA is a really beautiful, powerful, simple way to stop taking things personally, to let go of that yucky stuff, let in the yummy stuff of life. If you're any kind of coach, or you work one-to-one in any way with people, it's a fantastic tool to add into your arsenal. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is about how to have non-resistant clients. And it's interesting how this episode came about. I've just recently been on an amazing, one of my hobbies is photography, an amazing overnight photography experience with my girlfriend Karen. And it was fantastic. The only thing really that that was a challenge was staying up all night. Didn't used to be a problem. But one of the things about that was we were talking about, back in the day, I guess. And I realized how much my experiences of taking LSD, and there weren't that many, we'll get into that, gave me some insights, I guess, into the nature of consciousness and the nature of our minds and the nature of reality. And I realized that they inform everything today. In fact, part of it being that MPA is a fantastic way, especially if you're a coach or a therapist, or from that perspective, of having no resistant clients. How cool is that? But go download that sheet. Again, you can go to the main website, joelyoungnpa.com, and you'll find a way to download that sheet there. Give it a go. And of course, check out all the episodes at www.beabrillianthuman.com. Now, today, talking of LSD and drug experiences and my wild youth, what I thought I'd do is give you a little bit of a backstory on LSD, otherwise commonly known as acid. And it's actually quite fascinating where it comes from. So I'm going to give you a bit of a history about it. Then I'm going to talk to you a bit about what my experiences were. And then we'll get into what were the things I learned so that you can have those in your awareness pocket. Okay, so fascinating history lesson. So LSD or acid, LSD actually comes from the chemical name. It's a crystalline version of, and I'll see if I can pronounce this right, lysergic acid diethylamide. Diethylamide? Oh my gosh. LSD. No wonder they shortened it. So it fascinated me looking into it because, again, my experiences were very much hallucinogenic and consciousness shifting. So I had a look at the background, and it's quite fascinating. So apparently it was discovered, or the therapeutic or hallucinogenic aspects of it were accidentally discovered by Albert Hofmann in 1943. What actually happened was he got a bit on his finger, and it was absorbed through the finger, and he had a very strange experience. And then he started to do experiments on himself and realized that, potentially there was a therapeutic or psychiatric application for this. And he worked for a drug company and that they were interested in those kind of applications. And so the whole beginnings of LSD were around the sort of psychiatric therapeutic intervention kind of approach. And in fact, it was taken on in Europe throughout the 1950s and used in that way. There were kind of two approaches back then. There was kind of small doses for a period of time, and then sort of a contained therapeutic conscious intervention. And then there was kind of the high dose kind of create a crisis. Because the interesting thing they found was that it would, bring up some of the stuff that was maybe tricky to deal with, and through various ways gave a form in which things could be faced that wouldn't otherwise be faced due to the sort of hallucinogenic kind of aspects to it. And then in the 1960s, it kind of got very popular in a number of ways. It was championed by a guy called, well, actually I say a guy, he was a doctor at Harvard, a Harvard psychologist called Timothy Leary. And it kind of, he was, again, going with the therapeutic, but also it became kind of used recreationally and kind of got this sort of, it was kind of the love, peace, and a drug that would break down all the social norms, part of that whole 60s love vibe revolution. But the thing about that period of time is that also they realized that, like most things are neutral, but, turn the volume up on something and you're going to also see the dark side of things. So there were all sorts of, people would commit suicide, there were murders, people became criminals, had psychotic episodes, those kind of things. So I ought to say, I should have said this probably earlier, that this isn't in any way, this podcast does not advocate the use of Class A drugs in any way, shape or form. So, because it's one of those things that's dangerous. And then as it moved forward, there was a guy called Terence McKenna who, I guess, took on the mantle from Timothy Leary, and he got very interested in the psychedelic experiences and how they related specifically to consciousness. There's a period of time where they actively looked at that link between, this sort of hallucinogenic sort of psychedelic experience and how it opens doorways into consciousness and actually raises your access to higher states of consciousness. And in fact, there was a recent article in The Independent which says they've just now, again, I love how science catches up. Science has now determined that at a quantum level, what happens with LSD is it does activate very similar quantum behavior than those what's often called the higher states of consciousness. And the way that Terence McKenna described it, and I love how he described it, he said it's like, the idea of the conscious exploration using hallucinogenics is to go off and retrieve ideas that fell through the net, if you like. If he uses an analogy of, you go fishing with a net. It's not about, going out in a little boat and catching a monster. It's about catching those wonderful, little, beautiful ideas that might otherwise get away, and to bring them back and to serve humanity. And he describes the idea of us being explorers in inner space, which made me think, in a way, that, if you go to outer space, you're going to need a spacesuit. You need a container that will mean that it's safe to go into those environments. And in a way, I guess I can see that sort of hallucinogenics in different forms can provide that suit, that container, especially if done in a way which is obviously safe and, I'd say, controlled. That might not be possible, but in a way, it's a spacesuit to go into that wonderful inner space and then bring back those wonderful perspectives, in the way that when the first people who went into outer space came back, and they were the first people to see, the Earth as a globe, like literally see it firsthand, and they came back changed men. And and again, sort of looking at it in terms of, we tend to think of LSD, it is a synthetic, it's a synthetic material, but it's actually based on a chemical that's found in mushrooms. So, and there's a lot of sort of resurgence, if you like, or popularity around plant medicine, things like ayahuasca and things, which again go back to the shamanic roots of using hallucinogenics as a way to access the other realms. And if you think about it, something like aspirin, will if you've got a headache and you take those kind of things, you might take an aspirin pill. Well, aspirin originally comes from plants. It actually comes from I think it's called a spirea shrub. It's a class of shrubs, including jasmine. But I mean, back in the Egyptian days, the Egyptians would use willow bark. So often it's thought of as, aspirin comes from willow, but really it's the salicylic acid that's inside those plants that has the properties which do various things to help with pain relief. So in a sense, it's like you could argue that even though it's a synthetic substance, it's the source of its impact comes from plants. So it's interesting in the path of LSD, how it started out as an accident. It became something which was seen as, back in the 50s, as something which had therapeutic advantage. Then kind of got into the whole populace of recreational drugs, and then became classified as a Class A drug. But still in the background, there's been explorations in consciousness today where they're discovering, because they know so much more about the quantum level and how the brain works and about different states of consciousness. There's now a lot of science going into states of consciousness. I've said that a lot, haven't I? But I just find it fascinating. And then again, you bring in that last part, which is, looking back at, the ancient shamans over the years that have used usually herbal based hallucinogens in order to access those different states of consciousness. And in a way, that was very much my experience when I experienced it. And certainly as I look back in terms of what I brought forward, I'd say that, as Terence McKenna said, bringing back some ideas that will serve humanity, they certainly served me. So I have memory of 3 distinct acid trips that I did. And I want to share a bit about each of them, because they sort of, now I look back over time, I can see how those 3, and I love that things come in 3s, are kind of a launch pad for what I went into, because I was, I guess, 21 at the time, and it was before I got into any kind of, without drug search into consciousness, personal development, all those kind of things. And as I look back over them, I can see how, if I look at it from a design by the universe for my ongoing experiences, I can see how it was beautifully set up. So the first one was actually at Reading Festival, and I was there with all of the band members. We were in a touring band at the time in the kind of alternative goth stroke, punk scene, I guess, and or rock kind of era. And so we were at Reading Festival, and the idea was mooted that we would, drop a tab and see what happened. And the drummer was going to be the straight man, which meant that he was going to remain sober and just sort of keep us in line. And it was wild. And for me, I went into I go back to the 60s and described as the love and peace drug. And absolutely, I was on the love vibe. I've got vague memories of wandering around, the campsite of Reading Festival, and overnight it was very late at night, and sort of going into the arena and having weird conversations and just dancing like a mad thing. And one of the memories there that I find interesting is that within the tent camp there was a camp sort of enclosure, really, which was with the Hells Angels. And I went traipsing in. Unfortunately, Nick, the drummer, was with me, traipsing into the middle of this, this group of didn't ask to be interrupted Hell's Angels going, "Hey man, I'm on the love vibe. I love you, man," and was promptly threatened with a hammer. The guy just said he'd cave my skull in if I didn't leave, and Nick, bless him, dragged me away and probably avoided serious injury, which goes to show sometimes in life, if you drop all of those sense of worldly controls, it can put you in harm's way, which is something I experienced much later in the realm of spirituality when you became boundless. And hence, I've just been talking a lot recently about Boundary Boot Camp, because a lot of encouragement in consciousness is, or the spirituality is, to drop all the boundaries. But if you haven't got that mindfulness of the necessity for boundaries, and I didn't when I was on that acid, you can put yourself in harm's way, because we live in a world which, you need to sort of meet the world where it is as much as you meet yourself where you are. And the other thing I remember about that first trip was the come down. The come down, in my experience, from acid is very long and very slow and very weird. I remember sitting on the outskirts of the camp at Reading Festival and just staring at a fence, one of those wire fences with cross wires, almost like chicken wire, and just getting the sense of this disconnection of the reality I was experiencing and the sort of the physical realm. Again, something which I think left quite an imprint on me, and certainly set me up for the experiences I had in the second trip, which was a little while later, but much more in a at-home social gathering with friends, kind of a party atmosphere, but not a busy party. It was just an intimate gathering of friends. And on that occasion, that was, I think, where I really got to experience the hallucinogenic side of things, because literally I was experiencing the form around me melting. It was an experience like seeing portals opening all over the place. And one of the things that is often reported about LSD is it sort of heightens the imagination or the creative aspect. But certainly the experience of seeing walls melting and the form that I trusted my eyes to translate reality and believed in it. This is one of the big lessons I learned, really. But the fact that everything seemed so fluid left a massive impression on me. So that was and it was generally a really joyful, expansive experience. That. Then the third time I took it was very different, because I went into that on the back of going to a party away from home, and I think some other people had taken some, and I felt a sense really of missing out, really. And so I wanted to take some, so I dropped a tab, but then other people had to go elsewhere, and a guy said he'd drop me home. So I was dropped home. No one else was in the house at the time. I lived at the time in a little shack next to the river out in the middle of nowhere. And so in a sense, because I think it was sponsored by the sort of fear of missing out, wanting to join in, all those kind of things, and then I was left on my own, it actually became a bad trip. Bad enough for me never to take it again. It was fascinating, though, because I was at home. It was like I was just gripping onto the sofa. The only thing that got me through was Led Zeppelin. I put When the Levee Breaks on. This is back in the day when there was vinyl. Didn't even have a CD player then. And just playing that over and over again and going through the multiple layers of the different aspects of When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin. And I wrote poetry. The one line has stayed with me, that Led Zeppelin, what has my mind let in? But it was a pretty intense experience. But as I realised, it's like if I go through those now, I'm thinking about the series of events that happened there. Again, this is pre-consciousness. It really wasn't long after that I started to explore things internally in terms of doing my own work. Because in that last trip, it really was starting to bring up stuff that was in the shadows that I'd been unwilling to face. And a lot of the hedonistic behavior that I was indulging at that time was medicinal in the worst possible way. It was, I had a very unhealthy relationship with alcohol. I didn't really do the heavy or hard drugs. I think acid's probably the strongest one, but there was loads of weed and all that kind of thing, but mostly used in a way, at least, from a slightly deeper shadow aspect of just trying to cover up all the stuff that was trying to come to the surface. But in a sense, I'd had the opening through those experiences. I'd had the experience of there's something, there's something not quite right with everything I've been told, with the reality that I believe is real. And then with the bad trip, it kind of got me, I think, in a place where it was like, okay, something inside me, not necessarily on a conscious level, because it was through other circumstances that conspired to get me actually to go and start looking at my shit. But it was a thing that went, okay, there's some demons in here, and they're pretty scary, and either you're going to face them or they're going to hunt you down for the rest of your life. So it had quite an impact in that way. So what were the lessons? I want to sort of break down what are the distinct lessons that I take from that, and then, put them back to you as a way to think about things. So I think at the core of the things I took away from those experiences was what I kind of mentioned a moment ago, which is that I thought that my eye to brain translation was reliable. I had the idea, and I think it's just there as an assumption that the things you see, the solidness that you see in particular, is real. It's the truth of things. But if suddenly what my eyes are translating, or my eyes and my brain and all the chemicals that are kicking off, if that can impact what you see, such that walls can appear to melt, then maybe what my eyes and brain are translating as reality isn't so true. What if things aren't so solid? What if this sense of our fixed reality? And at the time, I think I was in a very fixed state of mind about how the world was and what it meant and those kind of things. So I think the question was born, that deep inner question of questioning reality, questioning my reality, questioning the things that I'd been told, questioning the assumptions. And now, of course, I understand, because I've looked much more into quantum physics. The basis of non-personal awareness certainly has huge aspects to it, which are, use the ideas of quantum physics to realize that we're going from a world where we've been sold this idea of this Newtonian idea of physics, which is the world is solid and separate. It's just like a machine with distinct mechanical parts, to the realization that everything is energy and therefore is more fluid. Ideas like that, how you perceive. So in case you haven't heard of it, like the idea that reality described in a quantum physics or quantum mechanics sense is that it is both a particle and a wave as in an energy. And what determines whether it is recorded or measured as a particle or a wave is based on the attention and intention of the observer. So it is so much more fluid. So I think the fact that I had a very visceral experience of that, as I said, it sort of propelled me unknowingly into a realm of exploration. And certainly you could argue it's a mistrust of reality, but I don't mean that in a negative sense. It's actually a really powerful and positive aspect of my life now, is that a lot of what I talk about is questioning the dogma, questioning the assumptions, and looking at the reality that we face as a more unique and fluid experience, which has made me a great therapist, a great coach, because one of the huge things, and it's threaded throughout MPA and non-personal awareness. I mentioned at the top of this episode that one of the things that I found is the great benefit of MPA and why it works so incredibly well is threaded within it. If you do the training and you really get into the underlying philosophies of non-personal awareness, then it is something which questions dogma and certainly drops the assumptions. And when you drop the assumptions, which is that solid idea of believing your own ideas about what you've been told, and what tends to happen there is you superimpose them over your client's experience, that creates jaggedy edges, that creates resistance, it creates blocks, rather than when you open your mind to a fluid individual reality, to an awareness that there's room for investigation in what's really there, and an absence of judgment based on some set idea of what reality is, then you're in a powerful place where you are on side with the fluidity. And when you can have that fluid experience, then there's no place for that resistance to stick. It's like the good old, it's like water will flow around a boulder. Whereas if you make that water all gooey, or it's going to stick to the boulder, or you turn it into Velcro, it's going to stick to things and make it jaggedy. So I think the primary lesson from my experiences on acid was that deep questioning. So I guess to put it back to you is to just let yourself ponder. It's like, ponder how much you take the ideas about your reality as fixed, as unchanging. Where in your life do you believe your assumptions? Where are there things that seem fixed about you but don't necessarily have a positive outcome in your life? Where can you open into the sort of if only I'd taken acids phase, but just open into that space where you can go, what if I question the assumptions? What if I ask what's possible? What if I invoke the idea that this is more fluid than I originally thought? If I wanted to implant anything in your mind today, it would be to invite the idea of fluidity, the melting walls, where things seem unchangeable or impossible, because that is where magic land begins. That is where your world can shift. You just need to open the door. And I think that was the original idea, going back to Terence McKenna and some of the original applications of LSD therapeutically. And, I say to people often, what you do when they ask what you do for a living, I say, I'm a doorman. I just open doors. But the idea where you feel like something is so unchangeable, so fixed, even though it could causing you pain, if you can just think back, just think how I remember Joel talking about being on acid and where those really solid walls began to melt. Maybe I can question how fixed things are. Maybe I can align with that fluid idea. And that can be enough sometimes just to step you through the doorway of possibility. A bit like you think, you're inside the house and then it only takes one step and you're outside the house. And in that moment, you've changed your world. So I hope you take that away today, my beautiful listener. Thanks so much for being here. Do let me know, have you had any wild hallucinogenic experiences? What did you take away from it? Do let me know. There's always on the Facebook page, MPA Rocks, a post that says about the podcast. You can comment there. You can send me an email, joel@nonpersonalawareness.com. You can even leave me a voice message if you go to www.beabrillianthuman.com. There's a little button there. Leave me a voice message. And that's a way to go. So just get hold of me, let me know. And by the way, I've now set up a Facebook page for the podcast itself. It's just search for Be a Brilliant Human on Facebook and you can find it. That's also a great place or a great way to get in touch with me. And by the way, I just wanted to say, I just realized looking down at my little scratchy notes here, if you haven't already listened to episode 47, it's about confirmation bias, and it's a great chat that I had with my fabulous marketing mentor, James Lavers. And in that conversation about confirmation bias, that goes back to the idea that we can get confirmation bias around the things that we think are real and strong. So what the thinker thinks, the prover proves, is the way that James put it. And so again, if you come across things that seem solid and immovable, that's another invitation, and that episode may help you to realize where sometimes our fixedness does us no favors. So you can find the show notes at www.beabrillianthuman.com/48 for this. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you hear, share it. Tell someone about the podcast. That'd be fantastic. And if you haven't subscribed already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you feel moved to, I'd love a review, especially if you're on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, because it seems that they're a good idea on there. But anyway, you can tell me I'm great. I'm up for that. All constructive feedback also welcome. No, I'm going to cry. With that, hope you enjoy the show. I will see you next week. All that remains, as ever, is to cue the moo.